Hello, everybody, and welcome to the As You Are podcast. My name is Leslie Vandergenst, and I'm the founder of Enso Coaching and Consulting. I'm here with one of our amazing coaches, Libby Detling.
Hey, hi.
And we are joined by Broadway star, Vincent Hooper. Hi, Vincent.
Hi.
He is in New York City, just coming off of a 2 show of The Lion King. This guy. Star, Simba.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty amazing. We're really excited to talk to you, Vincent. Mostly because we've known you for years.
10,000 years.
10,000 years. So we had the opportunity to do a show with Vincent in 2000. We were trying to figure out if it was 2012 or 2013, but somewhere around there. A show with an Austin production called Half and Half. Mm-hmm. And it was called Passing Strange, which is still one of my favorite musicals to this date. And Vincent was a whopping 18 years old at the time.
Yeah.
And starred in that show and just blew us all away with his amazing talent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maturity. And
maturity, yeah. And
I was not like that when I was 18. Yeah. I was the opposite.
Well, so that was how we got to know each other. And then we did some other shows together, in Austin. And then fast forward a few years, maybe a decade, and here you are now starring on Broadway, which is just amazing.
Yeah.
So we wanted to talk to you a little bit about your journey and how you got there. So let's just start with okay, senior in high school, did some shows, and then ended up going and doing this production of Passing Strange. Can we just start there and then let's go through?
I mean, that show was sort of the first time that it was my first lead outside of, high school. And it was the first time that I truly saw myself in the material.
Yeah.
I remember reading that script and every day we would, do rehearsal and dig into more stuff. And I was like, oh, this kid is me. And because prior to that, you're doing Guys and Dolls in school, and it's I'm not a 1930s gangster. I don't know anything
what
about
is this?
Yeah. But yeah, I was like, oh, this is I'm really discovering some things about myself through doing this show. And then after that, it was we got some awards for the show, which was cool. And then I think that year I had gotten into AMDA in I think LA. And talked to some of my mentors and decided not to go because, they just felt like I could do better, so I took a gap year. I kept working around, just sort of exploring the industry, and the following year I decided to go to college and try out the college thing just to see what's that like. Mm-hmm. And I went to Texas State for all of 1 year. And towards the end of my time there, one of my professors took me aside and they were like, "Why are you here?" And I was like, "I don't know." Because I had some, conflicting feelings about my time there, but I was like, maybe I'm being an arrogant freshman. Maybe I just need to take my time and give it a beat. But then having this person say that to me, I was like, okay, well, if I'm already feeling this way and haven't communicated that to anyone, and they're seeing this and reflecting it back at me, then I feel like that's a sign.
Yeah.
And so, I went ahead and I left school, went back into the workforce. Again, just sort of, hopping on playbill.com, backstage.com and chasing down gigs and sort of forging that path, sort of by hand. And then, skipping over a couple of steps. I do a production of In the Heights in Austin, which then translates into auditions for Hamilton, which then translates into getting the call that I'm going to do the show on tour. And then that's, that takes about 4 years of my life off and on. With a pandemic sort of in the middle.
Yeah.
Always a good time,
Yeah, I was just, everyone had a blast. Pandemic, went back, finished up some more Hamilton stuff, did the show in Australia, did a show off Broadway here in town. called White Girl in the Danger, which was the wildest show I've ever done. And then right before that closed, I got the call about Lion King, and
Oh my gosh.
here we are a year later, and we're rocking and rolling, jumping around, and being a lion.
Okay, well, so you have to take us back to the conversation that mentor, because it's
Yeah.
clearly something that stood out to you because you've singled that out. What was it that they said to you that really stood out for you as a pause moment?
I think it was mostly just the fact that someone outside of myself was sensing the lack of alignment with my environment.
Hmm.
Oh.
Like I felt like, in a way, going to school slowed my progress in a way.
Mm.
Like, because I felt like I was making so much progress and learning so much while I was in the workforce around people who were doing it like actively,
Yeah.
and had been for a long time, that I was able to like ask them questions of things that felt very practical and
Yeah.
like useful
Yeah.
in real time. And so then, like, going to school, because I had also done a showcase here in New York right before I went, so I was having to say no to a lot of things. Like, the public theater called me about coming in for their Shakespeare in the Park, and like agencies were calling and whatever. And I was like, "Oh, I'm in school in Texas."
Yeah.
Um,
So
and they were kind of
lame.
like, yeah, they were
Okay.
kind of like, "Oh, okay, well, man." Um, so yeah, it was that, they were just really forthcoming in a way that I don't know that every educational environment of that kind would be. Like, I don't know that that there's a lot of professors that would take the time to be that honest.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I just really appreciated that.
Yeah. So when you're talking about like making the decision, so you had
Mhm.
taken a year off and then made the decision to go to Texas State, what was it that caused you to say, okay, I'm gonna go to college?
Um, Truly just curiosity. Like, as I told them in my in-person callback, uh, I was like, I've already proven to myself that I can work in the industry. Um, so like, and that I enjoy working in the industry, because those are not always the same thing.
Mhm.
Um, and I was like, so this is really just to make sure that I haven't missed anything, and sort of the curriculum that I gave myself in that process. I was like, let me just cover my bases, and like,
Mm,
have I been as I guess diligent as I assume?
mhm,
And so like going to school was sort of a little litmus test of like, okay, like, oh, like, are there truly like huge gaps that
mm.
I'm missing that this could help supplement? Um, and yeah, I mean, for me in that particular environment, I came to the realization that I wasn't really missing much,
Yeah.
or at least not anything that I couldn't get elsewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's different, like studying something like theater. It's very
Mhm.
different than like
Hmm.
going and getting your
Like
like
going to med school?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It's the ability to go and practice and the ability to go and do is and that like kinesthetic like element and the competition that you have to experience with other like, humans is
Mhm.
much more valuable than the education. But the strange thing is that there's still this like stigma around like, well, to your point around like asking the question of like, is there something else that I'm potentially missing that I need to go and seek?
Mhm.
Exists versus, this doesn't make any sense for me right now, which, I think the great thing is that people are starting to ask those questions a little bit more often,
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
they were in the past.
Well, and also I think, the industry moves so quickly, especially now, that there has to be a real through line between like educational systems and what's actually happening, because I think that there's often a delay
Mhm.
in that translation of like, here are the needs and the desires of the industry as it pertains to like today,
Mhm.
Mhm.
this moment that we're in, and it's like, oh, but then because perhaps a lot of the faculty at some of these establishments might not be as active as they maybe once were, then it's like, oh, now your information is delayed because you're not in it anymore. So
Mhm.
and it's
Right.
really that's really the only thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because, when you're in the arts, there is no, like you were kind of mentioning, there's no clear path to like,
Mhm.
you're going to graduate. And I mean, so many people, they get done with their BFA, they graduate school and they're like, all right, here I come, world. Slash, like there's no one there to build what those next steps look like for you. And so I think, just the fact that you were able to realize like, this is not for me, and just having the ability to go ahead and start building what that looks like
Yeah.
is
Mhm.
I mean, is huge, and probably gives you I mean, everyone has to have their own journey, but at some point, if you do have a job in the arts, you are going to have to be creative in the way that in what success looks like, in the way that you build that path, because it is not built for you.
Right.
Yeah, it really isn't. And also I think that something I maybe subconsciously caught on to is that it really is about so much more than just talent. Like there are so many
Yes.
incredibly wildly talented people, and like by no means would I say that I am at the top of that list. But I'm like, oh, but there's so many other factors that go into like how you navigate this industry and then maybe find success in it that, I think you only learn those things through the practice of
Yeah.
doing it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanna say that there is a level of tenacity that I think you have had, Vincent, since we knew you,
Oh,
right? Like, so I
yeah.
think, like, I just remember you at 18 years old were like, I'm gonna do this, like, there's nothing gonna I mean, like,
Doing
it's
it.
gonna happen, and so let me can we just start there with, like, what was it? What was that certainty like? Like, how did you get to that level of certainty at such a young age?
Oof. Um, I honestly don't know. I really don't. I mean, I think that I I don't know, and I think probably Passing Strange was like a real pivotal moment for me, but like I think I just found something in the work that was like, yeah, truly like a spark.
Mm,
And I just had to chase it. I don't know. I've always been a really curious person.
mm,
Mhm.
And so with that curiosity, it's like I think that's where the tenacity comes from. Is that I'm like I'm just so eager to know more and to experience more things that I'm like, well, I have to keep chasing this down because I'm like I don't think I've reached the end of the book yet.
yeah.
Yeah, uh, yeah. I don't know. There's I can't imagine doing anything else. Um, yeah, and so I'm just like, Will Smith had a quote where he said something about like, if you're gonna have a plan B, you might as well make it plan A.
Mhm.
And
Nice.
maybe I took that too much to heart.
Yeah.
And and I was just like, yeah, like if I really want to do it, then I think I really need to like do it for
Go for
real.
it.
Yeah, yeah, and because I'm like, I think I've seen a fair amount of people who are again, like, incredibly talented, but then it's like, oh, like, because of things that are incredibly, like, truly justifiable, find themselves sort of, turning left or turning right because it's like, well, this thing crops up, or maybe I need a bit more financial stability, or maybe I need to, and then you sort of start to the path starts to kind of, diverge a bit,
Mhm.
and I was like, I don't know, I think that anytime that I've had the option to bet on myself
Mhm.
versus the option to do something that most people would consider safe and smart and
Right.
whatever.
Right.
Um,
Opposite.
yeah, I'm like, I'm gonna keep choosing this one just because I'm like, I don't know. I'd rather fail on my own terms and be able to
Mhm.
be content in what that life then becomes than follow what somebody else tells me is what I should do, and then I end up unsatisfied in some way. I'm like, that doesn't really feel, I want to be able to take account and accountability for how my life ultimately ends up.
Yeah.
Not that I'm doing it on my own, but
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. But it is the choices. I mean, that's super powerful, Vincent. And so, like, when you're talking about the things that you've learned as you've kind of gone through this process, like, what are some of those things? Like, what are the things that you've learned about the industry and about maneuvering it outside of just talent? And we need to stop and pause and just be like, but you are also
No, you
like
are really
wickedly
talented.
talented. So,
Yeah.
side
Thank
note.
you.
But also, like, what are the other things that you've had to kind of persevere through and learn through as you've kind of gotten to
Yeah.
this point?
I mean, a lot of people told me growing up, like, "What's for you is for you," and I always thought that was such a like
Profound.
platitude, just empty. Like I was like, okay, yeah, whatever. But then like the older I've gotten and the longer I've been in this industry, the more I realize like that is truly actually the case.
Mhm.
Mm,
Um, you know, I'm a big believer that as long as you're running, you're never gonna miss your bus.
mm,
So I'm like, yeah, like if you're actively doing the work, I'm like the things that are for you, like you're going to meet them every time.
Mhm.
And I mean, that's one. And like, also, I think that just, being a kind person goes a really, really long way. Like, at a certain point, everyone's talented. Like, you can throw a rock in New York City and hit someone who can sing their face off.
mm,
Mhm.
But it's like, a lot of times it comes down to like, who do I want to work with? Because the reality is, we're going to spend about 8 hours together, 6 days out of the week
mm.
during rehearsals.
Yeah.
And if I don't enjoy you,
Yeah.
then like I don't it doesn't really matter that much how talented you are. Like I'm like, I don't want to spend that much time with you. And then
Yeah.
let alone like tech rehearsals are going to be 12 hours and it's like, oh, you're somebody that complains a lot or always it's like it's just yeah, and I've talked to a lot of creative folks on the creative side about that too and they're like, yeah, like I'll take someone who maybe has like a weaker dance ability over someone who can, kick their forehead if the person with a weaker dance ability is just like nice to be around and like
Mm,
workable and
Mhm.
humble and all these things. um yeah, yeah, I don't know, I think that there's something to be said about like letting humanity lead.
yeah.
um because I think that affects the way that audition rooms feel for you and the people on the other side of the table. That affects the way that rehearsal rooms feel for you and everyone around you. That affects the way the run of a show will go. um Yeah. Yeah, because I mean, yeah, that's just
I mean, it's real.
Yeah, one of the things that we, with our coaching program that we focus so much on with our clients is, and regardless of what you're doing, is values and what is important to
mhm.
you and what is kind of at your core. So, you mentioned knowing what is for you and what is not for you. So how has that kind of shown up when, what are the gigs that you're like, yes, that's something I want to be a part of, or maybe some that you're like, that's a great opportunity, but I just do not align with, where that's going. How has that kind of shown up in your life?
Yeah, I mean, the first one that comes to mind is just being very intentional about, you know, uh, feeling like Broadway was something that was gonna be in my journey at some point. I was like, I wanna enter that space in a way that is not, for lack of a better word, like, easy to discount or, ignore or overlook. Um And so, yeah, I was like, if I'm gonna be on Broadway or make my Broadway debut, I'm like, yeah, I want to be like the guy, properly.
Mm,
Like, and so it's stuff like that, or even like now, like getting auditions for things. If I look through the script and I'm like, well, if I turn my brighter brain on, I'm like, oh, if I can take this character out of the story and nothing really changes that much, I'm like, I don't really want to do that. Or if I feel like the way the character is written plays into tropes or stereotypes or just societal narratives that I don't feel like need any more play. I'm like, well, if y'all are not open to us having a discussion about like how do we, without necessarily changing the show you're trying to make, how do we sort of like curate this?
mm,
Um, if that's not of interest, then I'm like, then yeah, you probably want somebody else. I mean, actually, I told my agents that at one point there was a thing they presented to me, and I was like, "This feels like just the black best friend character."
Mm.
Yeah.
And I was like, That's boring to me." I'm like, I'm interested in playing people. They don't need to be heroic. They don't need to be, these like noble images. I'm like, 'cause that's not real life. But I'm like, but they do need to have layers and nuance and yeah, I need to have permission to be honest in what I'm doing as opposed to playing sort of like an idea or just doing the sort of like musical theater thing of like, yeah, it always just feels like a bit of a veneer on top of the thing just so we can like just get to the next song. But like this theme is
Yeah.
just kind of whatever, you
Yeah.
know. Um, which again, I think I was spoiled because my two first like big, professional things were Ragtime and Passing the Strange, which I'm like
Right.
are
Right.
very well constructed pieces of theater.
Yeah.
So my taste buds are just a little maybe a little uppity. But
Yeah, no, but what I'm hearing you say is that you have a really clear understanding of what you can contribute to a production, and if your contribution, and I think this is like again going back to some of the stuff that Libby and I talk to all the time, like you can go take a job, you can go take a gig anywhere, but being really clear about how much more you as an individual can enhance something and being
mhm.
really clear about that versus just taking anything that's flying at you that's like living a really purposeful life, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that
because
can
I
be
think
hard on Broadway. That
Yeah,
can be
because it's
hard as
like,
a
yeah,
theater, right?
yeah.
here's the dream, and here's people saying, like, look over here, this is shiny, this is what you've always wanted.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, I mean, it's a job and it's hard work. And
Yeah.
you want to make sure that you're invested and you believe in what you're actually doing. Otherwise, in the same way that we talk to people that have, burnout from their 9 to 5 jobs because they're not in alignment, I can imagine,
Mhm.
you know, a weekend full of, shows. And if you don't like what you're doing, come Monday, you're going to be like
Burnt out.
really burnt out and not
Yeah.
loving it.
Yeah. Yeah, and also I think something for me is always front of mind is, like, not trying to chase a check.
Mm.
Yeah.
Money is absolutely important and financial security is absolutely important. I can't, suggest otherwise, but I'm like, but I have to believe in the thing first.
Hmm.
Like, I'm like, I will take a pay cut for something that I believe in before I get paid cajillions of dollars to do something that I think is not good.
Hmm.
Um, or just, like, is not put together with intention. Um, yeah, because I don't know, I feel like that when we start to chase money or some sense of acclaim or whatever, that like that's where we start to kind of, next thing you know, you blink and you're like, oh, how did I end up hanging out with these people, going to these places, doing these things? Like, um, so yeah, just trying to keep the I don't know integrity, I guess, at the center, and
Hmm.
Yeah.
then if it comes with people handing you an award, if it comes with a big check, then great,
Yeah.
wonderful. Um, but yeah, it's like because I'm like the thing that is known is that like it's going to be work. Uh, so like if you're going to enjoy that part, then like it makes it worth it.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So you were talking earlier about, in the industry being hands-on and being in the business and doing
Hmm.
the work has caused, clarity around where some people might, veer off and like do other things versus like staying kind of in integrity with like, I'm going to keep going down this path. I'm going to keep auditioning. I'm going to keep, working towards this versus like leaning towards safety or whatever.
Hmm.
Like, what are the things that you've learned, specifically you, Vincent, through this process of just like staying the path, like, continuing to audition, continuing to engage, continuing to fight for what you're passionate about? What are some of the things that you've learned and you've taken away from it?
Hmm. Um, I mean, I've learned that uh the fastest shortcut to wherever you want to go is consistent quality. Um, and I've said that to a friend of mine who like was asking. He was about to come up to New York and make the big move and whatever. He was asking me about like networking and this and that. And I was like, honestly, the best thing you can do is be of quality every time you enter any room. And like not just like how you perform and like your talent, but also like how you are as a professional human being.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I've been workshopping a new musical for the past year and a half, 2 years now. That we're about to do a production in the spring,
Mm.
and I got the offer for that first reading of that from an audition I did back in like 2017.
Oh,
Mm.
wow. Yeah. Yeah. It's a small world,
You know,
right?
but it's like, yeah, it's like, oh, you came in, you presented yourself in a way that somebody responded to positively. And I'm like, you don't know how that's gonna then benefit you a million years later,
Mm.
But it's like, oh, but if you know, conduct yourself in a way that you're like, well, this audition doesn't really matter. I don't really care about this or that. Then I'm like, you actually genuinely never ever know.
Mhm.
And if nothing else, I'm like, yeah, each time you step into a workshop or an audition or a rehearsal space, it's a chance to practice the thing that you said that you wanted to spend your life doing.
Hmm.
Um, and so I'm like, yeah, who are we to take that for granted?
Yeah.
I tell people all the time because they're like, oh, how do you, stay consistent and how do you whatever? And I was like, well, when I was back in Texas wondering how people even got auditions for Broadway, the dream wasn't to get there and half-ass it.
To be just
It wasn't yeah,
meh.
it wasn't to just be like, like checked off the
Yeah.
Broadway debut. Now I can kind of
Now
just
you're
like
done. Yeah.
Yeah.
coast.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm like that's part of the fuel of the engine is like if I'm gonna be here, I wanna like be here. And that does take a lot of discipline and a lot of work and you're going to be tired. And as a mentor told me, he was like, uh, he said, it's clear you're destined for greatness. He's like, but I want to tell you also that like that doesn't mean you're always gonna know what's going on. It doesn't mean you're always gonna have money. It doesn't and that was such a honestly incredible thing for him to say to me because I was like, I think that myself and I think others would agree with this. Like we get in this mindset where we believe that, oh, if it's meant to work out, if I'm meant to achieve this big dream of mine, it's gonna be this like
Yeah.
meteoric, just straight to the top
There it is.
ride. And it's like, that's not real.
Never.
I'm like, you're
Nothing
gonna
worth
have
anything.
dips. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're gonna have dips, you're gonna have things that feel like they're steps back when probably they're actually steps forward. It's like there's gonna be a lot of confusion and uncertainty, but it's like, oh, you have to just keep going because you never know how close you are to
You're next.
that thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to your point, Vincent, about this idea of like consistency and staying committed to it, I think a lot of times, especially for artists, the general public sees an end result
Mm.
and it
Mhm.
feels like, oh, magic happened. That's great. Like, how do I get that? And the reality is that the people who are actually doing this, it's years and years and years of practice, of
Mhm.
consistency, of the work. I mean, I feel like there was an interview in the Olympics around this, and I, like,
Mm.
sometimes it's so funny to me. I always think about like people talking about athletes, or they talk about like Taylor Swift doing a 3-hour performance. I'm like, go put a heart rate on Vincent
Yeah.
after doing that show,
Yeah.
like, I mean, that's a
It's
3-hour
work.
show
Yeah.
and, and singing and dancing and costume changes and all kinds of stuff. And it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, like you don't get to see the amount of work that happens behind the scenes
Mhm.
for years and years and years to actually get to that point. And, and we live in a society where quick fixes, we want to see something in 6
Gratification.
weeks. We want to,
Yeah.
we want immediate gratification. And the reality is that anything that's worth something is not, it takes consistency and it
Mhm.
takes time and it takes energy
Yeah.
and
Well, and I think the interesting thing about it is that for really most anyone who's doing something at a level that people aspire to, part of the job is to make it look easy. Like nobody wants to see your work. You know,
Simba struggling, huffing and puffing.
like this is not math class. Like nobody wants you to show your work. They just want to
Yeah.
see you doing the
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, even like with you all, like I'm like with this show, this podcast, this thing that you're all doing, like I'm sure that somebody somewhere is watching your videos and your content being like, oh yeah, all we gotta do is get a couple mics and a buddy
That's it.
and and here we go. And I'm like, sure, like if that's how you want to digest this, fine. I can't stop you from doing that. But like, yeah, one day you'll understand that. Yeah, it's like there's so many other layers, and then like you're just seeing the top. If I'm being generous, like 10% of the thing when you come to the show or when you watch the Olympics or when you whatever. Um, yeah, and all the rest is like maintenance.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, just like anything, we have to like understand what we want the outcome to be, right? If the outcome is a beautiful performance, if the outcome is a good podcast, if the outcome is, whatever that outcome is, and then it's like, okay, great, we're clear about what that looks like, then what are all the like baby steps that we have to take behind the scenes in order to get there, to your point. And and again, it's a difficult time because we live in a time of just like
Everyone sees end result. Everything is perfect and everything goes. It's just
like that.
instant gratification.
Yeah, it like I can't help but think about, and I'm not trying to throw any shade at anybody, but can't help but think about the like TikTok and Instagram actors,
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
where like, oh, someone's like mouthing along to dialogue from a movie and just making faces, and I'm like, oh, that's what y'all think it is.
Right.
Is
right.
like just sort of like, oh, like I say something in a cool way and I like do some eyebrows and like I look over here, I look over there. And I'm like, that's not like
It's
I'm
not
like, you're trying to
real.
get from point A to point B in the fastest way possible. And I'm like, that's
Right.
not actually what it is, though.
Yeah, and how long does that last, right? And to your point around like, and this is going to be the next question, FYI, but like, you're starring in like one of the most popular shows, I mean, on Broadway ever.
Yeah.
And, and that's taken a lot of work, et cetera. Somebody who's doing a quick TikTok that's getting a lot of views maybe today, like what's the sustainability of that? And like what's the what happens after that thing is tired and old and nobody gives a crap about it anymore almost?
Ooh, yeah.
I guess
you
we
can
can-
say shit.
Yeah, I can say shit.
It's our podcast.
We do what we want.
Yeah.
I mean, but the reality is that that's fleeting. It's ephemeral. It's like not going to last very long. And the work that you're doing now is leading to something greater. And this is like, Vincent didn't just like pop in one day and be like, I'm gonna be Simba.
He was born on
But
Broadway.
like legit, I mean, like we've seen, Libby and I, obviously we've known you for a long time and we've seen all of the work that you've done and that you've put in and sprinkled in for years and years and years. And I mean, we got to see White Girl in Danger, which was hilarious.
It
Great
was.
work,
It's
by the
so
way.
funny.
And then,
Thanks.
and then to hear you, to see you do this is like years and years and years of work and years of commitment and years of, I'm sure struggle, right? And like, just like
Yeah.
the work, right? And so I guess the next question with this like kind of theme around consistency and continuing on is like, what is next? Like you have been a star on Broadway in one of the biggest shows. Like, what do you see next for yourself?
I mean, things will play out the way they're intended, but what it feels like is the likely outcome. Like I said, I've been workshopping this new musical for a few years now. We're doing a production at Paper Mill Playhouse in the spring. It's very exciting. The show's called Take the Lead. I'm not being secretive about it.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Very
Public
cool.
knowledge. And I'm like, I think it's a high likelihood that that'll transfer to Broadway, which will be cool to to originate a role on Broadway in that way, and do all the cool things that come with that. And I would love to do more TV and film. I think that I've I've told my agents, I'm like, I think it's just gonna be, again, if that original Broadway cast thing comes along, that it's like, oh, then more people know who I am, and then all of a sudden everyone's like, oh, hey, like come on
do
and do our
this.
TV show. Um, because suddenly I exist.
That's yeah, that's how it works.
Yeah, like, yeah. I mean, I'm releasing an album next month.
Yeah,
I've
let's
been
talk
working
about
on that
that.
for. Yeah, yeah. It's 9 songs of original music, written by me. And yeah, I've been working on it since January. We just finished production. I want to say like a month and a half, 2 months ago.
That's awesome.
So now we're in the mixing and mastering process, and just trying to get everything paid for, make sure everybody's taken care of on that end. And yeah, we've got cover art. We've got 4 songs already out right now, available for streaming wherever you get your music.
Awesome.
Nice plug.
And you used a different name, so it's not Vincent Hooper. What's
I
your
do, yes.
Yeah.
It's not Vincent Hooper. It's Boy Wonder, BoiWunder, which is just really, people have asked me many times, like, oh, like why the name change? And I think really for me, it's, among other things, it's about just having different lanes. I think that oftentimes as an actor, my name will be associated with whatever project it is I happen to be working on at the time, which I think, were I to use my name for my music, could feel very limiting in terms of like what I could sing about or talk about or whatever. Especially, like working for Disney, like I'm like, it's just,
It's
there's
like
certain
you're
things
in
that
like
you
the
probably,
sweetest like candy sweet.
Yeah.
So I was like, let me just create a whole separate lane that gets to exist independent of whatever it is I happen to be doing, or happen to be associated with. So I'm free to say whatever, speak on whatever I feel
Yeah.
inclined to.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what brought on that project? Was it just like the creative bug or like what?
I mean, once I started with Lion King, I told myself, I was like, I don't want to spend this next year of my life just doing Lion King.
Mm.
Because as physically challenging as the show is, I'm like, uh the brunt of my work is in act 2, and it's a very efficient script. So I'm like, I have a lot of room. Uh I have a lot of excess creative energy that I was like, well, I can't just sit there.
Mm.
So I was like, yeah, maybe now's the time to do this music stuff. And so, yeah, I did.
That's so awesome.
I love it too because I do feel like when you're an artist and it's your passion, there's that. But when it's also your work and your livelihood, I think there can be that line of, where it gets kind of blurry between what's passion and what's work. And so I think that, having something extra that's kind of your own and is your own voice, I think is really important. And that's, I think a lot of times it takes a lot of people a long time to kind of discover that you don't necessarily want to be in just one of those lanes.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I wanted to be sort of proactive in that. And, because I'm like, down the line, if things start to shift in a upward trajectory, I'm like, oh, I'd rather have an album in my back pocket and not need it than potentially need one and not have it.
Mm.
So I'm like, yeah, if anybody over the next, however many years of my life is like, oh, we really liked you in that show. Like, would you be interested in? I'll be like, well,
Hold
like, I already have an album of music.
Yeah.
Here's a script. Here's a, it's like you just kind of like
Yeah.
do these things really just to have them. And if something comes of it, then like great. If not, then it was a great exercise in making something.
Yeah. Vincent, what's the biggest challenge that you face right now as you're like starring on Broadway, making an album, working on new projects?
Mm-hmm.
Like what do you struggle with?
Oh gosh. Perspective is a tricky thing. I think that because like you say all of those things which are very cool and exciting and wonderful, but also I'm like, I think that sometimes people will see the headlines and like rightfully so, like don't understand the experience of the thing. And so it's like, Yeah, I experience my fair share of stress. I actively try to live as stress free of a life as possible, but I'm like, my girlfriend just got in from Australia, and so like making sure that she's set up and that's the immigration process is not easy. Surprise,
Right.
surprise.
Right.
And so supporting two people in New York on one check, and it's like, and then you're also having to do maintaining doing the show, which it's like, okay, you have to be healthy and you got to be strong. So it's like, okay, I'm going to the gym 3 times a week, and then trying to also make time for seeing friends and spending time with my girlfriend, and then doing stage door occasionally. And sometimes stage door is a bit of a interesting interaction. People can feel very familiar,
Mm.
uh and there's a uncomfortable level of ownership sometimes that it feels like people think that they have, and so they expect you to like a woman just the other day asked for a photo, which I'm like happy to do, great. But then I was standing like this, like with my arms sort of crossed in front of me, and she was like goading me to like give her like a hug and like embrace her, and I was like, that's such an odd
Yeah.
thing.
I
Like we
don't
don't
know
actually know each
you.
other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, someone else was like, oh, can we see your chest again? And I was like, that's a really weird thing to say to another human being.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's just
Vincent.
like it's stuff like that. It's like it's by no means would I ever complain about the lifestyle that I'm in because partially I chose it, of course, but um yeah, I think it's sometimes it's harder than people imagine.
Yeah.
It is
And
kind of
there's
cool.
always a give and take, right? Like no matter
Oh
what
yeah.
level of, success somebody achieves and, there's always something kind of lurking around the corner that is unexpected. Like who would have known? Who would have thought Vincent at, whatever 18 years old, you're like, I'm going to be on Broadway and then I'm going to be expected to hold a
Yeah,
lady,
some lady is going to ask me to show my chest.
Mhm. You never expect it, right? And like it's like isn't that a lesson for us all? Like no matter what, where we get to, there's always something that we're struggling with, that people are struggling with, right? And that's what we always try to
Yeah.
Mhm.
keep things real with whoever we're talking to and whoever you're engaging with. You just never know what somebody's kind of going through or dealing with.
Yeah, and even when you get the
Yeah.
thing that you want or you land the dream job or whatever it is, that there's always going to be
There's
stuff,
more.
and it's how are you prepared to handle that stuff. And again, knowing yourself really well, coming back to knowing your values, what you stand for, and not just
Mhm.
waving
Yeah.
where the wind takes you. I think that is really what is important.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting line to toe. Like I mean, like yeah, I think a lot about social media, and I'm like, should I be doing more stuff on social media? Should I be posting videos of me singing and doing whatever? And I'm like, but that doesn't feel aligned with me. But that also
Okay.
feels like maybe the thing we are supposed to like. It's like you got to promote and you got to da da da. And I'm like, yeah, but that doesn't. Yeah, it's like all that kind of like weird stuff that I think comes with being in this modern age, and also I think in particular in being in this industry is like
Mm.
there's a level of performance that can feel almost like a constant that I'm like, you know, debating, which I think the answer that I know I'm gonna choose and have chosen is that I don't want to opt into it. But it's always this back and forth of like, do you opt into that performance of like find your aesthetic and your brand and
Yes.
make videos and
Right.
or
Right.
not? And then like, which is the right one and which gets you where you want to go is
Yeah.
up to
That's so funny
you
because
know.
I remember when you were here a couple months ago and I was like, did your people tell you you need to make videos and post them on social media? And you were like, yes.
Yep. Yep.
Like, sure
I
did.
hate it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
my least
Yeah.
favorite thing
Yeah.
of all time.
It's always good because I'm like, oh, here they come in like a cluster. I can tell.
True.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hard. I mean,
Yeah.
it's hard to maneuver. And I think, going back to what you were just talking about, which is like have a really clear understanding of what you want the outcome to be. And I think that tells you moving backwards, like what are the things
Mhm.
that I need to do? And if that's not it, then is there another way? But I think, like so many things, if we know what we want the outcome to be, then we can work backwards to figure out exactly what what we need to do. And if something feels like I'm just doing this to do it because I'm told to or and like need to, then like it can be a struggle. But if we can attach that to some outcome or something that we actually want, then it can feel a little bit more connected to,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well,
Absolutely.
I mean, I've heard hard work, consistency. That's like a huge thing, right?
Yeah.
Man, don't we know it? Hard work and consistency in everything and everywhere. And then curiosity. We're like two big takeaways here, Vincent.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
I would, absolutely.
Anything else, Libby? Did you hear anything else?
I mean, I think why am I always the values person? I don't know, but I think the clarity on values, authenticity, being kind, please be kind,
be
people.
Kind.
It goes
really
so
easy. It actually is really easy.
It's literally the thing everyone can do.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, Vincent, where can people see you? No, just kidding. But where can they like learn more about you and follow you and hear about your album and all of those things?
Yeah. I'm on Instagram, Vincent Jamal Hooper. I'm really responsive on there. So if you want to know anything appropriate, I'll tell you. Outside of that, the music is on Apple and Tidal and Spotify and YouTube and all the things under, again, Boy Wonder. And
see him on Broadway as Sinbad.
See me on Broadway as Sinbad.
Yeah, you better see it. How much longer are you? How much longer is your contract? Are you there for?
I am leaving on March 16th.
Oh,
so
got to get out there. March 16th. Go see Vincent.
There.
Don't miss him.
Yeah.
This is a guy.
I know
the guy.
I have to because my child reminds me every day that she gets to go on stage, backstage, see all the things. So she didn't forget.
Awesome.
Good.
Well, thank you so much, Vincent. We really appreciate you. This was so much fun to catch up and
so good to see y'all.
Yes, good to see you.
All right. And as always, follow us on all of the channels, and we will see you on the next episode of As You Are. Thank you.